Next up, we're diving into the fascinating world of economics and energy policy in our episode titled Fueling the Fire, the U.S. Energy Conundrum. I'm your host, and today we're exploring the unexpected uptick in U.S. inflation with a focus on the surge in gasoline prices and its implications for the country's energy policy. This is a topic that has everyone from economists to politicians talking, and we're going to break it down for you in a way that's easy to understand, so buckle up.
I'm intrigued. So, you're saying that the rise in gasoline prices is not just a minor blip, but rather a symptom of a larger issue.
Exactly. The fact that gasoline prices are jumping alongside other essential items suggests that the U.S. may be experiencing a broader structural issue with its energy policy. I mean, think about it. When was the last time you filled up your gas tank and didn't feel like you were being robbed? It's like, what's going on here?
Right? That makes sense, I guess. But isn't the US still one of the world's largest oil producers? How can they be having an energy crisis?
Great question. Yes, the U.S. is a major oil producer, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're immune to global market fluctuations. And let's not forget, the country's energy policy has been criticized for being overly reliant on fossil fuels. I mean, have you seen those massive trucks driving around spewing out smoke and pollution? It's like, can't we do better than this?
Okay. So, what you're saying is that the US needs to diversify its energy sources to reduce its dependence on volatile fossil fuels. But how realistic is it to expect a significant shift towards renewable energy in the short term?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. While it's true that transitioning to renewable energy sources takes time and investment, the benefits far outweigh the costs. For example, did you know that the cost of solar energy has decreased by over 70% in the last decade? It's like this is a no-brainer.
Whoa, that's crazy! I had no idea. But what about the argument that investing in renewable energy would lead to job losses in the fossil fuel industry?
That's a common misconception. While it's true that some jobs may be lost in the transition, the renewable energy sector is actually creating new job opportunities at a rapid pace. In fact, a recent study found that the solar industry alone employs over 240,000 people in the U.S. It's like we're not just talking about saving the planet, we're talking about creating a whole new economy.
Right. I see what you mean. But how do you respond to critics who argue that the U.S. can't afford to invest in renewable energy given its current economic priorities?
Well, I'd say that's a short-sighted view. Investing in renewable energy is not just an environmental issue, it's an economic one. By reducing dependence on fossil fuels, the U.S. can actually save money in the long run and create new opportunities for growth. It's like we're not just talking about going green, we're talking about going gold.
That's a great point. And what about the role of government policy in driving this transition? Should the U.S. government be prioritizing investments in renewable energy sources?
Absolutely. Government policy can play a crucial role in incentivizing the development and deployment of renewable energy technologies. For example, tax credits for solar and wind energy have been instrumental in driving growth in those sectors. It's like we need to put our money where our mouth is.
Right. I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. But what about the argument that Trump's tariffs on steel and aluminum imports could actually hurt the renewable energy industry?
Great point. Yes, those tariffs could indeed have unintended consequences for the renewable energy sector, which relies heavily on imported materials. It's like we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
Okay. So, what's the way forward? How can the U.S. balance its economic priorities with the need to transition to a more sustainable energy policy?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. But one thing is clear, the U.S. needs to take a holistic approach to energy policy, one that prioritizes sustainability, innovation, and economic growth. It's like we can have our cake and eat it too.
Right. I think I'm starting to get it. But what about the role of individual consumers in driving this transition? Can we really make a difference by, say, buying electric vehicles or investing in solar panels?
Absolutely. Individual actions can add up to make a significant impact. For example, if every American household installed just one solar panel, it would be equivalent to taking millions of cars off the road. It's like, we're not just talking about saving the planet, we're talking about saving ourselves.
Whoa, that's mind-blowing. I never thought about it that way. Okay, so what's the final verdict? Should the US prioritize investments in renewable energy sources to reduce dependence on volatile fossil fuels?
Well, our reliance on fossil fuels and creating a new economy that's based on innovation and growth. It's like, we're not just talking about the future, we're talking about the present. Next up, we're discussing the latest inflation numbers and their impact on low and middle income households. I'm calling this episode Inflation Nation. Can Trump deliver? We're going to dive into the world of economic policy and explore potential solutions to address the concerns of working families. I mean, who doesn't love a good game of economic chicken, right? It's like a real-life game of Monopoly, but instead of houses and hotels, we're talking about people's livelihoods.
That's a great point. I'm not sure I understand how this all works. So, you're saying that Trump promised to lower costs for working families, but the inflation data says otherwise. That's like saying you're going to give everyone a free ice cream cone, but then you take it away and replace it with a bill.
Exactly, and that's why Senator Warren's statement is so important. She's highlighting the fact that Trump's policies may not be living up to his campaign promises. Now, when it comes to concrete policies, there are a few things that could be done to help low and middle income households. For example, increasing the minimum wage or implementing policies like progressive taxation could help alleviate some of the pressure.
Okay. So like if we raise the minimum wage, won't that just lead to higher prices for everything? I mean, I've heard that argument before. It's like a big game of Jenga knee. You pull one block out, and the whole thing comes crashing down.
Great question. That's a common concern, but the research suggests that moderate increases in the minimum wage can actually have a positive effect on the economy. It's all about finding that sweet spot, like the perfect recipe for your favorite dessert. And it's not just about the minimum wage. We need to look at the broader picture and consider policies that address income inequality, access to affordable health care and education.
Right. I see what you mean. So it's like a big puzzle, and we need to find all the right pieces to fit together. But what about tariffs? Trump is talking about imposing new tariffs on major trading partners. Won't that just lead to higher prices for consumers? That's like putting a big tax on everything we buy, isn't it?
Exactly. Tariffs can be a double-edged sword. While they may provide some protection for domestic industries, they can also lead to higher prices and reduced competition. It's like trying to navigate an obstacle course. You need to avoid all the obstacles to get to the finish line.
Okay. So, what's the alternative? Should we just get rid of tariffs altogether? I mean, I've heard that argument before. It's like a big debate between free trade and protectionism.
Well, it's not that simple. A more nuanced approach might be to focus on targeted reciprocal trade agreements that promote fair competition and protect workers' rights. And, it's not just about trade policy. We need to think about the bigger picture and how all these different policies intersect.
Right? I think I'm starting to get it. So, it's like a big web of interconnected threads? But what about the Federal Reserve's role in all this? Should they be raising or lowering interest rates to combat inflation?
Great question. The Fed is walking a tightrope here. On one hand, higher interest rates can help curb inflation, but on the other hand, they can also slow down economic growth. It's like trying to balance a seesaw, find the perfect balance.
Okay. So, what do you think they'll do? Will they raise or lower rates? I mean, it's like trying to predict the weather. You never know what's going to happen next.
Well, based on the latest data and Powell's statements, it seems likely that they'll hold steady for now, but that could change depending on how the economy evolves in the coming months. It's like trying to solve a mystery. You need to follow all the clues to get to the solution.
Got it. And finally, What about Trump's statement that lower interest rates would go hand in hand with his plans to impose tariffs? Doesn't that seem contradictory? I mean, it's like saying you're going to make a delicious cake, but then you add a bunch of ingredients that don't go together.
Laughs, well, that's a great point. It does seem counterintuitive, but in politics, sometimes you have to look beyond the rhetoric and examine the underlying policies. In this case, it seems like Trump is trying to thread the needle between competing economic priorities. Whether he'll succeed remains to be seen. It's like trying to predict the outcome of a game, as you never know what's going to happen until it happens.